The ocean was calm, but his heart was at war. The moment he stepped onto the sunlit sand and locked eyes with the woman who could fire him with a single sentence, he knew this was more than a swim. This was pride against power, dignity against humiliation. And if he lost, it wouldn't just cost him money. It would cost him the one thing he had left to protect, his daughter's future. Before we dive into this unforgettable story, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of single parents who refuse to give up. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. Daniel Carter had never imagined his life would narrow down to a single fragile thread. 5 years earlier, he had been a husband, a homeowner, and a project manager with a steady career. Then came the accident that took his wife, the hospital bills that swallowed his savings, and the sleepless nights that turned him into both mother and father for his 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Since then, every choice he made was measured against one question: would this help Lily feel safe? That was how he found himself working as a facilities coordinator at one of the most exclusive beach resorts in the state. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. The job offered health insurance. And sometimes when the sun dipped low and painted the ocean gold, Daniel could almost convince himself that life had not broken him completely. His boss, Victoria Hale, was nothing like the calm horizon behind her. She was young, sharp, and carried authority like a tailored suit. The resort had flourished under her leadership, and investors praised her relentless drive. But beneath the polished confidence, there was a competitive streak that turned even casual moments into challenges. That afternoon had begun as a team-building retreat. Executives, managers, and select staff had gathered on the private stretch of beach owned by the resort. Laughter mixed with the crash of waves. Someone suggested a swim race to the boy floating 100 meters offshore. What started as light fun turned into something sharper when Victoria, noticing Daniel's athletic build, publicly challenged him. The staff circled around, phones raised, smiles expectant. Daniel could feel the old humiliation creeping in, the feeling of being the struggling employee everyone pitied. Victoria's tone carried playful arrogance, the kind that assumed she would win because she always did. He could have refused. He could have laughed it off. But he thought of Lily's school tuition that was due in 2 weeks. He thought of the warning email about potential staff cuts during the upcoming restructuring. And something inside him hardened. He accepted the swim bet, but he demanded something forbidden. If he won, he wanted a written guarantee that no employee under her leadership would be laid off during the restructuring without a full review process and alternative placement offered first. It was a bold request. It crossed a line. It challenged her authority in front of her staff. The beach grew quiet. Victoria studied him with surprise, perhaps even a flicker of respect. The forbidden part was not the paperwork itself. It was that a subordinate had dared to attach conditions to a game initiated by the boss. Pride flickered across her face, and pride made decisions quickly. She agreed. Daniel stepped into the water, the cold rushing up his legs, stealing his breath. The boy looked farther than it had from shore. He hadn't trained in years. His body still carried strength from the construction jobs he'd worked in his 20s, but grief and exhaustion had replaced discipline. The whistle blew. He dove forward, slicing into the ocean. The first strokes felt strong. Adrenaline pushed him ahead. He heard splashing beside him. Victoria keeping pace. The salt burned his eyes, but he refused to slow. Each pull through the water became a memory. Lily's first day of school without her mother. Lily crying at night because she didn't remember her mother's voice clearly anymore. Lily asking if they would ever be rich. Halfway to the boy, his arms began to tremble. The ocean was heavier than pride. He swallowed water and coughed, losing rhythm. For a moment, fear wrapped around his chest. He wasn't just risking embarrassment. He was risking everything. Victoria surged ahead. A quiet panic rose in him. If he lost, he would return to shore not only defeated, but exposed. He had revealed his vulnerability in front of colleagues. He had gambled on compassion in a corporate world that rarely rewarded it. Then something unexpected happened. As he lifted his head to breathe, he saw the shoreline, and on it a small figure running toward the waterline with one of the staff members holding her hand. Lily. One of the housekeepers must have recognized her from the staff daycare and brought her to watch. Daniel didn't know how she had found out about the race. Maybe word had spread. Maybe children sensed when their parents needed them. But there she was, waving wildly, her tiny silhouette framed by palm trees. In that instant, exhaustion loosened its grip. He was not swimming for pride. He was swimming for her future. He adjusted his strokes, focusing not on speed but on rhythm. He had once learned that endurance wins more races than bursts of power. Victoria, driven by competition, was burning energy fast. Daniel steadied himself, feeling the water rather than fighting it. At the buoy, they reached almost together. Victoria slapped it first, but barely. As they turned back toward shore, she was breathing heavily. Daniel sensed the shift. He let the ocean carry him, each stroke measured, deliberate. Slowly, steadily, he pulled ahead. The shoreline grew closer. Thud. Cheers echoed faintly over the waves. His lungs screamed. His shoulders burned. But every time doubt whispered that he was too tired, he pictured Lily's smile if he succeeded. He reached the sand first. For a second, he lay there, face pressed against the warm shore, tasting salt and victory. The crowd erupted. Phones captured the moment. Victoria emerged moments later, her expression unreadable. She walked toward him as he stood, dripping and exhausted. The air was thick with anticipation. Would she laugh it off? Would she retract her agreement? Instead, she extended her hand. There was no speech, no humiliation, only acknowledgement. The staff saw it. They saw their boss honor a challenge initiated by someone below her rank. And in that silent exchange, something shifted within the culture of the resort. But Daniel's greatest victory was not the applause. It was the look in Victoria's eyes. Not anger, not resentment, but contemplation. Later that evening, after the beach emptied and the sun melted into the horizon, Daniel sat alone on a wooden bench near the staff parking lot. His muscles throbbed. Doubt crept back in. Had he overstepped? Would there be consequences hidden behind professionalism? Victoria approached him quietly. The conversation that followed was not heated. It was thoughtful. She asked about his daughter, about his life, about why job security meant so much. And for the first time since she had hired him, she saw not an employee number, but a father balancing grief and resilience. In the weeks that followed, the written guarantee was implemented, not just for show, but as policy. A staff review board was formed. Layoffs were reconsidered. Alternative placements were created. Morale improved, but the real change unfolded more slowly. Victoria began noticing Daniel's quiet leadership, how he stayed late to help maintenance staff, how he fixed small problems without seeking credit, how he listened when others were frustrated. She began inviting him into planning meetings, not out of charity, but because his perspective grounded decisions in humanity. Daniel, meanwhile, began to see Victoria not as a distant authority figure, but as someone carrying her own invisible weight. The resort's success came at the cost of sleepless nights and investor pressure. Beneath her competitiveness was someone who had been taught that vulnerability meant weakness. The swim had challenged more than pride. It had challenged belief systems. One evening, months later, Daniel received an offer, a promotion to operations supervisor, better pay, flexible hours, stability. When he told Lily, she wrapped her small arms around him and declared that he was the strongest man in the world. Not because he had won a race, but because he never stopped trying. And perhaps that was the forbidden thing he had truly demanded that day on the beach. Not paperwork, not policy, but recognition. Recognition that dignity matters, that single parents are not liabilities, that compassion and leadership can coexist. The ocean that once felt like an obstacle now felt like a witness. It had seen a father choose courage over comfort. It had seen a boss choose integrity over ego. If this story is touching your heart right now, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that quiet strength can change even the most competitive world. Before we close, I have a special request. Comment the word strength if you believe that real power comes from protecting others, not overpowering them. Because Daniel's story is not just about a swim. It is about what happens when someone with little to lose decides to stand tall anyway. It is about the ripple effect of courage, how one brave request can soften a rigid system. It is about a child watching her father refuse to be small in a world that often demands it. In the end, the bet was never truly about who could reach the buoy first. It was about who would rise above fear, who would choose growth over pride, who would see beyond titles and paychecks to the beating hearts beneath them. Daniel walked that beach many times after that day, sometimes with Lily, sometimes alone. Each time he remembered the cold shock of the ocean, the weight of doubt, and the warmth of triumph earned honestly. He had entered the water as a worried employee. He came out as something more, a man who proved that respect is not given by rank, but earned by character. And somewhere in the rhythm of the waves, there was a quiet truth echoing for anyone willing to listen. Sometimes the most forbidden demand is simply to be seen. If this story moved you even a little, please engage with this video. Share your thoughts and help spread a message of resilience and compassion. Your support keeps stories of hope alive. Because out there on another shoreline, another father may be standing at the edge of his own impossible ocean, wondering if he has the strength to swim. The promotion changed his title, but it did not quiet the storm that followed. Success, Daniel would soon learn, often comes with a different kind of test. The morning after his promotion was announced, he arrived at the resort earlier than usual. The sunrise painted the ocean in soft pinks and golds, and for a brief moment he allowed himself to feel proud. Lily had drawn him a picture the night before, a stick figure standing on top of a wave with the words "My Hero Daddy" written in uneven letters above it. He had folded it carefully and placed it inside his wallet, but as he stepped into the operations office, he felt the shift immediately. Congratulations were offered with smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Some handshakes were firm, others were reluctant. A few longtime employees avoided his gaze entirely. The truth settled in quickly. He had not only won a swim, he had disrupted a hierarchy. The resort had always functioned on unspoken lines. Executives made decisions. Managers enforced them. Staff followed. Daniel's public challenge months earlier had cracked that structure. Now he was standing in a role that bridged both worlds, and not everyone was ready to accept that. Victoria, however, did not hesitate. She placed real responsibility in his hands. He was tasked with overseeing scheduling maintenance budgets and staff welfare programs, including the employee review board that had grown out of the infamous swim bet. The irony was not lost on him. The forbidden demand that once seemed reckless had now become part of the company's identity. Investors had initially questioned it, worried about efficiency and costs, but turnover had decreased, productivity had risen. Word spread that the resort treated employees fairly. Bookings increased. Still, pressure mounted from above. One afternoon, Victoria called him into her office. The ocean stretched behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows, but her expression was heavy. A major investor wanted immediate budget cuts due to a downturn in overseas travel. Numbers had to shrink. Fast. Daniel felt his chest tighten. The old fear returned. The fear of layoffs, of families depending on paychecks. This time, however, he was not the powerless employee. He was part of the decision. The easy path would have been to trim staff quietly, offer severance, and protect profits. That was what most companies did, but he remembered the promise born from saltwater and pride. He proposed something riskier. Instead of layoffs, they would temporarily reduce executive bonuses, renegotiate vendor contracts, and introduce cross-training programs so staff could fill multiple roles during slower periods. It would require cooperation. It would demand humility from leadership. It would also test Victoria in ways the swim never had. The board meeting that followed was tense. Daniel sat at the long polished table, aware that some still viewed him as the maintenance guy who won a bet. He spoke calmly, presenting data, projections, and testimonies from staff. He did not speak as a father this time, but as a strategist who understood that loyalty cannot be bought, only earned. When the vote was cast, the proposal passed by a narrow margin. The cost-cutting plan was implemented without a single layoff. That night, Daniel drove home feeling a deeper exhaustion than any swim could cause. Leadership, he realized, was heavier than grief. It meant carrying not only his daughter's future, but the livelihoods of dozens of families. Lily was waiting by the door when he arrived. She had learned to read his mood from the way he parked the car. When he looked tired, she greeted him with extra enthusiasm. That evening, she showed him a school certificate for a most helpful student. She had stayed after class to help a new girl who was struggling with reading. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Strength was contagious. The months passed, and the resort began to stabilize financially. But stability did not mean peace. Rumors spread that a larger corporation was interested in acquiring the property. An acquisition could mean massive restructuring, and promises made during swim bets might not survive new ownership. Victoria seemed distant again, buried under confidential calls and meetings. The warmth that had grown between her and Daniel cooled under corporate tension. Then came the announcement. The acquisition offer was real, generous, tempting. The corporation promised expansion, global branding, and high returns, but there was a clause buried within the proposal, operational restructuring at their discretion. Daniel didn't need legal expertise to understand what that meant. The staff sensed it too. Anxiety returned to the hallways. Smiles faded. The fragile culture they had built trembled under uncertainty. Victoria faced the hardest decision of her career. Accept the deal and secure her own financial future, or reject it and gamble on independence. One evening, long after sunset, she asked Daniel to walk with her along the beach where everything had started. The tide was high. The buoy that once marked their turning point bobbed quietly in the distance. They walked in silence at first. The ocean seemed to wait. Victoria admitted something she had never said aloud. She had built her career on winning contracts, winning negotiations, winning competitions, but that swim had been the first time she lost publicly and gained something greater privately. She had learned that leadership was not dominance but stewardship. The acquisition would make her wealthier than she had ever imagined, but it would undo the policies that defined their resort's identity. Daniel listened without interruption. He did not advise immediately. He knew that true decisions cannot be forced. He told her only one thing. The day she chose integrity over ego had changed more lives than she would ever see. And whatever she decided now would echo just as loudly. Days later, the answer came. Victoria rejected the acquisition. The announcement stunned the business community. Analysts questioned her judgment. Investors were divided, but the staff, the housekeepers, the chefs, the groundskeepers, felt something rare. Security born not from contracts, but from conviction. And the resort would grow slowly, organically, on its own terms. With independence secured, Victoria restructured leadership again, this time elevating Daniel to director of operations. The role came with higher pay, broader influence, and something he valued most. The power to protect the culture they had fought for. But Daniel's greatest test was yet to come. One winter evening, Lily fell ill. What began as a fever escalated into a serious infection that required hospitalization. As he sat beside her hospital bed, listening to the steady beep of monitors, all titles and promotions dissolved into irrelevance. He was just a father again. Victoria visited quietly without press or announcement. She brought books for Lily and ensured Daniel's responsibilities were covered indefinitely. There were no speeches, no corporate gestures, only humanity. Lily recovered after several frightening days. When she was finally discharged, she asked her father why so many people from his work had visited her. Daniel realized that the culture they had nurtured had extended beyond policies. It had become family. Years later, the resort stood as a case study in ethical leadership. Business schools analyzed its growth strategy. Articles highlighted its employee retention rates. But no article ever captured the truth fully. It began with a father who dared to ask for fairness in the middle of a game. On the anniversary of the swim, Daniel and Lily returned to the beach. She was taller now, her laughter louder, her confidence blooming. Victoria joined them, not as boss and subordinate, but as partners in a shared legacy. But the boy still floated in the distance. Daniel stepped into the water once more, not to race, not to prove, but to remember. The ocean felt different now, not an adversary, but an old teacher. He understood something deeply that day. Life would always present new waves, new risks, new moments where pride and principle collide. But courage, once chosen, becomes a habit. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the waves, Lily ran along the shore, shouting that one day she would swim faster than both of them. Daniel smiled. He no longer feared the ocean. He no longer feared powerful people. He no longer feared asking for what was right. Because the forbidden thing he demanded had never truly been about contracts or corporate guarantees. It had been about dignity. About protecting the vulnerable, about believing that kindness, when defended bravely, can reshape systems that seem immovable. And perhaps that is the quiet miracle of his story. A single father stood at the edge of the sea, accepted a challenge meant for amusement, and turned it into a movement built on respect. The waves continued to roll in, indifferent yet constant. But for those who knew the story, each crest carried a reminder. Real leadership is not proven by who reaches the buoy first, but by who ensures everyone else has the strength to keep swimming. If this journey has stayed with you, if Daniel's courage, Lily's faith, and Victoria's transformation have touched something in your heart, carry it forward in your own life. Sometimes all it takes to change a system is one brave request and the willingness to step into deep water. And somewhere tonight, another parent may be standing at their own shoreline, gathering the courage to dive